It was the chaos at the end of a collapsing empire that birthed the legend. A rumor whispered among refugees and soldiers passed from one trembling hand to the next. Somewhere, buried beneath the scorched rails of southern Poland, a train loaded with unimaginable wealth had vanished. Gold, jewels, art plundered from across Europe. A fortune so vast it could buy armies and erase debts. They called it the Nazi gold train. This is the story of that train. The desperate flight, the vanishing, the generations of treasure hunters, and the uncomfortable truth about what nations leave behind when they fall. By early 1945, the Third Reich was retreating on every front. Soviet armies smashed into eastern Poland, Allied forces pressed from the west, and the rails that once carried troops and supplies were choked with refugees and wreckage. Behind the front lines, Nazi administrators and SS officers scrambled to move looted assets westward. Artworks from Polish museums, gold seized from banks, even boxes of jewels taken from victims of Nazi persecution. They loaded freight cars under cover of night, rerouted trains along hidden sidings, and in the fog of retreat attempted to protect what they still could. One account, repeated in diaries and military reports, tells of a special train assembled in Wrocław and Breslau, towns then under German control, loaded with crates stamped with official seals. According to the testimony of a few surviving railway workers and later wartime interrogations, orders came from high up. Move the valuables out of zones soon to be overrun, bury them if necessary, and leave no clear trail. The train that would become myth, some witnesses said, left on a snowy evening and headed south toward the mountainous borderlands. Then, it disappeared. There are as many versions of that disappearance as there are graves in Europe. The train, some say, was ambushed by partisans. Others insist it was struck by Allied bombing and plunged into a ravine. A particularly persistent tale claims that SS officers, fearing capture, drove the train into a tunnel and sealed the entrance with explosives. Local villagers swear they saw tracks leading into a hillside and then nothing more. Over decades, these stories hardened into legend. After the war, investigators searched the wreckage of Nazi logistics. They found looted artworks hidden in salt mines and bank vaults, and they uncovered the bureaucracy of plunder, the Reich's meticulous lists of stolen property. But proof of a single enormous gold train remained elusive. Some documents referenced sealed shipments, others were vague, their paper shredded or burned in the confusion. For historians, the idea of one legendary train, a single repository of the Nazi loot, was tantalizing but unproven. That uncertainty was the spark that kept the legend alive. For decades, treasure hunters, conspiracy writers, and local residents kept listening for the sound of a pickaxe against metal. Starting in the 1960s and intensifying in the 1990s and 2000s, amateur expeditions combed Polish countryside, scanned with magnetometers, and dug into old mine shafts. Each claimed discovery: a patch of disturbed earth, a rusted railbed, a faint metallic echo on a detector. Ignited headlines, then faded as experts found nothing conclusive. Why does this story grip us so tightly? Because it combines elements we understand: war's plunder, the moral outrage of stolen wealth, and the irresistible romance of hidden treasure. But it is also about memory and responsibility. The purported cargo was not anonymous gold. Much of it was stolen from homes, synagogues, and works of art that represented communities destroyed in the Holocaust. The idea of treasure waiting to be reclaimed is a moral problem as much as an archaeological thrill. In 2015, the saga leapt back into international attention. Local Polish miners exploring an abandoned railway tunnel near Wałbrzych reported anomalies on ground-penetrating radar. Videos surfaced online showing rusty bolts and a sealed tunnel mouth. Images that quickly attracted a flock of hobbyist treasure hunters and professional salvagers alike. Soon the site teemed with cameras, drones, and international teams trying to verify whether the rumor of a train could be real after all these decades. Polish authorities moved to control the narrative. The site was cordoned off, historians were consulted, archaeologists demanded rigorous scientific methods rather than simple treasure hunting. The excavation that followed was cautious, expensive, and politically charged. For locals, the prospect of a find promised tourism and revenue. For investigators and families of Holocaust victims, the possibility raised sensitive issues of restitution and provenance. If the train existed and contained looted goods, who had the right to claim them? Nations, survivors' heirs, or private investors? Months of excavation produced fragments, a few corroded rails, twisted metal, small personal items. No glittering hoard. Yet every negative result spawned new theories. Perhaps the train had been rerouted again. Perhaps it had been emptied earlier by retreating troops. Perhaps the real cargo had been moved to underground salt mines that already proved repositories of Nazi art. Experts watching from universities and museums warned against quick conclusions. World War II logistics were messy. Trains were often reduced to parts and cannibalized for materials. Cars were decoupled and repurposed. Records were falsified, names erased. The truth, they reminded the public, is rarely as neat as legend promises. But the search continued. Because the search is about more than treasure. It is about the need for closure in a landscape littered with unresolved histories. It is about how communities reckon with dark legacies. Collaboration, looting, silence, and the long tale of grief. Throughout Eastern Europe, these unresolved histories took local forms. In some small towns, elderly residents kept quiet memories. A strange convoy in the night, soldiers ordering them away, a sudden boom, a train that never returned. Those memories passed orally. Across generations, often diverged from official histories curated in state archives. For many Polish communities, the war's immediate devastation left practical concerns. Rebuilding homes, resettling populations. The idea of a treasure train sometimes became a metaphor for lost security, the vanished savings and family possessions swallowed by catastrophe. Internationally, the myth fed into a market. Books were published, documentaries produced, and tourist excursions marketed as gold train tours. Each retelling adapted the narrative to its audience. Some drew parallels to Indiana Jones-style adventure. Others emphasized restitution and justice, highlighting that any recovered items would likely have provenance tied to victims of Nazi theft and therefore demanded careful legal processes. Legitimate historical work has slowly peeled back parts of the story. Archival research demonstrated that indeed, in late 1944 and early 1945, shipments were made under high-level orders to move Reichsbank reserves, industrial assets, and cultural collections. Some of these were destined for remote salt mines in Silesia and the Sudeten region, places later known to have stored art rescued from looted European museums. The famous case of the Merkers salt mine, discovered by American forces in 1945 and found to contain a treasure trove of gold and currency, proved that the Nazis used subterranean storage when they could. That discovery lent credibility to the idea that other caches might still lie hidden. Yet Merkers did not prove a single gold train. It proved a practice. It demonstrated that the Reich did indeed stash wealth underground, and that some of those stashes were recovered, while others remained unlocated. This is where the story of the lost train sits between possibility and myth. In recent years, the ethical dimension has sharpened. Museums and governments have grown more active in provenance research, attempting to trace artworks and assets to rightful owners. Restitution efforts have returned masterpieces to families, and nations have repatriated collections. If a train filled with plundered treasures were found today, the legal and moral task would be vast. Identification, forensic analysis, and the patient work of returning items to heirs when possible. So why do treasure hunters keep digging? Part persuasion, part hope, part the thrill of being the one to solve a great mystery. Some are motivated by profit, others by a genuine desire to right historical wrongs. In many cases, both impulses mix uneasily. Local economies sometimes depend on the tourism such searches produce, and political figures can leverage discoveries for short-term gain. But perhaps the most sobering element of the gold train legend is what it reveals about memory itself. Legends persist where archives fail or where the brutality of history leaves gaps too painful to fill. The gold train symbolizes not merely lost wealth but lost lives, families who watched as everything they owned was taken, communities whose cultural patrimony was plundered, and a continent trying to catalog what was gone. What would a discovery mean then? If a train were found with identifiable loot, family silver, synagogue Torah crowns, museum paintings, it would open a process of truth-telling and de-restitution. It would demand international cooperation, historians, legal experts, diplomats, museum curators, and descendants working together. It would also force uncomfortable questions about who benefits from myth. For every artifact returned, there would be a small victory for justice. For every sensational headline, there is the risk of obfuscating the deeper histories of violence and complicity. As we look back, we must accept a difficult lesson. Wars end, but their consequences do not simply vanish. They persist in missing items and missing people, in landscapes of memory scarred by loss. The lost gold train, whether an actual armored freight of bullion or a symbolic cluster of vanished wealth, asks us to confront what we owe to the past. Today, metal detectors still sweep the fields, and old survey maps are pored over in archives. The quest continues not merely because of treasure, but because the search opens conversations that otherwise remain closed. Each dig forces a society to ask, what did we lose? Who took it? And how can we repair what is possible? In the age of digitized archives and global cooperation, perhaps the best hope is that the truth, when found, will be matched by justice. If pieces of the past resurface, they must not disappear again into private collections or sensational headlines. They must be documented, preserved, and, where rightful ownership can be established, returned. Legends like the Nazi gold train will likely endure. They will inspire books and films and late-night podcasts. They will attract dreamers and profiteers. But for historians and for the families of victims, the story remains a call to do the slow, painstaking work. To track provenance, to help communities heal, and to ensure that when history yields a treasure, it serves the cause of remembrance and restitution rather than the commerce of myth. In the end, the lost train is a mirror. It shows us the human hunger for closure and the moral obligation that follows discovery. If it is found, and perhaps one day it will be, we must be ready not only to marvel, but to make right what was torn from so many hands during the darkest hours of the 20th century. This was the story of the lost Nazi gold train. Part fact, part legend, all reminder. Remember the loot, remember the victims, and remember that some treasures are not about riches, but about restoring memory.